All right, let's talk about a relationship that's really on the rocks. We're diving into the massive clash between the United States and India. Now, these two are supposed to be strategic partners, right? But they're currently locked in a trade dispute that could seriously unravel decades of working together.
50%. Yeah, you heard that right. Just let that number sink in for a second. In August of 2025, the U.S. slammed this massive new tariff on a whole bunch of Indian goods. And to be clear, this isn't just another tariff. It is the highest, the steepest tariff ever put on a major strategic partner. It sent absolute shockwaves through the global economy.
So the big question here, the one we're going to unpack, is how on earth did we get here, right? How did two powerful allies, two democracies that are so closely aligned on so many things, end up staring each other down on the brink of a massive trade war? Well, the answer? It's a lot more complicated than you'd think. Okay, so to really get what's happening today, we've got to go back a bit. This whole thing didn't just pop up overnight. Think of it more like a slow burn. It's built on years and years of smaller fights and friction that basically set the stage for this huge explosion.
In this timeline, it lays it all out pretty clearly. You can see the dominoes falling. It really kicks off back in 2018 with those U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum, and India, of course, hits back. Then, in 2020, things get more serious. The U.S. cuts off India's preferential trade status, that's the GSP. Basically, a deal that let India sell certain things to the U.S. without paying taxes. So a big deal. By early 2025, they're trying to talk it out, but things are tense. And then, bam, August 2025, the U.S. just drops the hammer, doubling tariffs on a lot of Indian goods to that crazy 50%.
All right, so what are they actually fighting about? Where are the front lines of this economic battle? Because this isn't some vague disagreement. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar conflict playing out in very specific parts of their economies. So let's break down these key sectors in the crossfire. You've got steel and aluminum. That's where it all started. Then there's agriculture, and this one is a huge sticking point. The U.S. wants in, but India is fiercely protective of its farmers and key crops. Electronics, a massive export for India, are getting hit hard. And then there's pharmaceuticals. They're okay for now, but there are threats of tariffs as high as 250% looming over them. Phew!
And if you want to understand just how much money we're talking about, just look at electronics. $14.6 billion. That's how much electronics India sent to the U.S. in fiscal year 2025 alone. That one number tells you everything you need to know about how high the stakes are here.
But here's where it gets really clever and kind of sneaky. The U.S. is being very strategic here. It's like they're using a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. They're letting the big-ticket items you and I buy, like smartphones and laptops, come through just fine. But they're slapping that 50% tariff on the stuff behind the scenes, the chargers, the inverters, all the little components and parts. It's a way to inflict maximum pain on the Indian industry without you immediately seeing a price hike on the store shelf.
Okay, so just when you think you've got this all figured out as a pretty standard, if nasty, trade dispute, there's a huge twist. A massive geopolitical factor comes into play that completely reframes the entire argument. This stopped being just about trade. And that twist is all about Russian oil. Look at this. By 2024, a full 35% of India's crude oil was coming from Russia. Why? Well, they were getting it at a huge discount. From India's perspective, it was a smart economic move, but from Washington's perspective, well, they saw it very, very differently. And this is where the gloves really came off. U.S. officials started throwing around some really strong language. They publicly accused India of using, and I quote, laundromat tactics. They were basically saying India was helping Russia wash its oil money and in doing so funding its war effort. Suddenly, this wasn't about tractors or textiles anymore. This was about global alliances.
And that right there, that's what triggered the final massive tariff hike. Let's be crystal clear about this. That last jump from 25 to 50%, it wasn't about trade negotiations. The U.S. government said it out loud. This was a direct punishment for India buying all that Russian oil. This is the moment the trade war and the geopolitical fight became one and the same.
So what's the fallout from all this? Let's talk about the consequences, because this clash is causing real economic pain and creating some really deep political fractures, not just between the U.S. and India, but inside both countries too. For India, the impact is, well, it's huge. We're talking a potential hit to their entire GDP of up to 1%. That's massive. That electronics business we mentioned, it could lose something like $20 to $30 billion. But the real story is in the sectors that employ tons of people, like textiles. They're incredibly vulnerable,
And that means the livelihoods of millions of people are on the line. But this isn't just a problem for India. Back in the US, this whole policy has kicked off a huge debate. You have really prominent figures like former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley coming out and saying this is a strategic disaster. Her argument, and she's not alone, is that you absolutely cannot treat a democratic partner like India as an adversary.
And economists like Jeffrey Sachs are echoing that exact same sentiment. He calls the whole thing a self-defeating blunder. He's basically saying the policy is backfiring, big time. Instead of pulling India closer, it's actually pushing them away and right into the arms of rival groups like the BRICS nations.
Meanwhile, what's happening in India? Well, the government there is digging in its heels. Leaders like Prime Minister Modi are turning this into a political rallying cry. They're projecting this image of strength, vowing to protect Indian farmers and businesses, and insisting that, in the end, India will come out of this even stronger. And all of that, it leaves us right here, with this one massive hanging question. Is this just a really, really aggressive negotiating tactic that's going to eventually blow over? Or are we actually watching a permanent break in one of the most important partnerships on the planet? The answer to that question, honestly, is going to shape the world for a long, long time.